now.
Great. I'm going to ask Jim Van Dusen, our board chair, just to say a couple of quick notes.
Thank you, Tracy. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Van Dusen, the board chair. Delighted to be here again this Friday. I think these events have been wonderful. So thank you to the Chamber for putting them on.
Does it look nice?
This event is second in a series really about reopening and what does it mean to you. We've got some great speakers as well again today, and I know them well. I do want to sort of leave that to Tracy, but I want to acknowledge the other board members that are here with us today supporting. We have Pierre Bonhomme and Carol Shirtliff-Hinds, who are both, hi Carol, are both, I don't see Pierre, but he's probably on one of my other screens. You know, I have an opportunity for sure to spend time with these guys, and I love listening to both of them, so I'm sure you'll enjoy it. As well, we have Kyle Burgess and Shauna Fardy also from the board. So welcome, guys, and thanks for helping support the things that we're working on. So I'll turn it back to Tracy and enjoy the session, everybody.
Great. So today we have speaking, I'd like to welcome our speakers, Pierre Bonhomme from Chaggares and Bonhomme, Chartered Accountants, who's going to talk a little bit about the CEBA expansion and some of the other government programs, as well as answer some questions. Carol Shirtliff-Hinds from Shirtliff-Hinds Law, who's going to talk about consumer risk and how to mitigate that as we move forward through reopening. And Trevor Beauchamp from Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. I knew I was going to trip on that one. Who's going to talk to us about a little bit about tools and resources to manage the safety aspects of reopening. I'd also like to welcome our MP, Tony Van Bynen, who I see up in the corner of my screen. And we have John Gallagher Murphy as well from Christine Elliott's office, our MPP. So we have both levels of government here as well, which is nice to see. So thank you for joining us. Pierre, why don't we get started with you? I can't see you, but I'm assuming you're on.
I'm here.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. All right, so we'll start with just going through some of the more recent changes and announcements. So obviously, the first one was on the CEBA loan. Originally, it had started with having to need payroll between 50 and 1 million. Then they expanded it to having payroll between 20,000 and 1.5 million. And just recently, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has announced that they're going to expand that to people who don't have payroll, who are paying dividends or are incurring expenses. And that is basically expanded to saying that you have to have eligible expenses between 40,000 and 1.5 million. And those people will be able to apply. Now, that has been the case with a lot of the announcements. A very vague announcement with not so many details. So until it receives royal assent and there's a little bit more details, that's really all that was announced. Now they did give some indication that the eligible expenses would be, you know, non-deferrable expenses, so rent, insurance, lease costs, and the like. So stuff that you're having to continuously pay that you can't stop paying currently. However, once they've formalized what the eligible expenses are, I'm sure that they will update the website to include those amounts so people are able to determine whether or not they qualify for the new program or not. The next program that was recently released is the Large Employer Emergency Financing Facility. So that was the LEAF. Now that's for very large employers. I'm not sure anybody on this call needs more details than that. If you do, I will put in the chat, as usual, a link to the government's website that you guys can all click on. And if you go to the business section, it summarizes everything that businesses are that's available to businesses in terms of subsidies, programs, and anything that else you can apply for in terms of the economic support that the government has put forward. And then we've got the more recent one, which is the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund, the RRRF, that Tracy has asked me to speak about. Now, if you're looking at applying this, it's very regional placed. So And when you click on them, you have to determine where you fall in terms of what geographical area you're in. For most of us in the GTA York region, it's the FedDev Ontario. So when you click on that page, so it's Federal Economic Development Agency for Southern Ontario. That program is split into two different program pieces. So the first one is basically similar to the CEBA loan, right? So you can apply up to $40,000. However, you need to qualify. And one of the biggest things that people don't understand on that program is in order to get that $40,000 loan, you had to have applied for all of the other programs first and been declined, which means a lot of people are, right, so they don't qualify for the original CEBA loan, so they figured they qualify for this, but they didn't do the Business Development Bank of Canada, so the BDC BCAP loan that was available. So if you haven't shown and you can't show that you've applied for these other programs first and didn't qualify for anything else, then they're just actually just going to throw out your application. So that is the first one. The second one, and they basically say you have to call. The second one is through the futures, community futures programs. Biggest problem with York Region and GTA is we actually don't have one of those centers for our region. So when you're taking a look, if you go to their website and you take a look at, well, do I qualify for that? And you look at their map, the closest one that we have is the Community Futures Georgina, which basically they say you have to kind of determine which one are you closest to and then call them to see if they would qualify. However, that program, the Community Futures program, is really designed and targeted for certain businesses, which are Main Street businesses and really economic grounding places for small communities, which is why York Region and GTA don't actually have one of those centers, because we're not considered a small rural area that needs that type of economic support. So again, not even sure that anybody in this area would qualify for it. So that one is really, really targeted. And then on top of that, they go on to say that they're going to give priority to any of these, this type of funding to manufacturing, technology, and tourism businesses before they'll open it up to anybody else. So, and then the reporting function to access that, you've got to go through their application process. The first one, the loan portion, right, for that $40,000 loan is really, you got to go through the application and then you got to do an attestation, and then there's actually ongoing reporting that you have to do to show that you've actually used the money the way that it was done. So they're going to have an active reporting, unlike the CEBA loan, which is really passive in your attestation of how you use those funds. Now, obviously, with all of the programs out there, if you're applying for them, just know that CRA at one point is going to be knocking on everybody's door and wanting to support and make sure that you qualified, because they're going to be auditing this heavily, because you are getting free money and they want to make sure nobody's abusing any of the programs that are out there. So it's really, this one is really, I think the least open in terms of funding for just general businesses. And when you take a look at that link that I sent in terms of what's available, you know, for everything, there's so that BCAP loan that I talked about, there's the CEBA, the CECRA. So just an update on that CECRA, which is the commercial rent subsidy. The applications for that are opening on May 25th. They just announced that yesterday. So anybody that does qualify, and again, you had to have a drop in revenue of 70%. Your landlord needs to agree that they're going to make that application. They have to forgive 25% of your loan. You have to pay still, or not your loan, your rent. They will forgive 25%. You'll pay 25%, and then the provincial and federal government will kick in a 25% each, so 50% forgivable loan. But again, your landlord needs to agree that they will allow you to apply. They need an attestation from them, and further, they actually have to have an active mortgage. So if your landlord actually doesn't have a mortgage on his property, it's paid off for one reason or another, he actually can't apply through that. If you go to the CECRA loan website, in that program, it basically says that if you're in the category of having commercial real estate without a mortgage, that another program to address that will be made available at some time in the future. We don't know when that is or how that's going to look. But right now, that program is being launched and is being governed by CMHC. Then you've got, like I said, the RRRF. There's the assisting innovative and early stage businesses. So if you're a startup company and you're pre-revenue type company, so you basically didn't have any sales, then you still can get some funding through that program. There's the young entrepreneurs funding, the business in the territories funding. Obviously, that doesn't apply to anybody here unless you have a remote office somewhere. And then women entrepreneurs funding. So there's really a lot of programs, and the government keeps adding. It's almost like a coin sorting machine where, they started here and then some people fell through the cracks. So now they've added another sift, and they keep trying to fill in so that they're really trying to support all businesses, all types, sizes, and variations out there, so that people that are going through the hard economic times are going to be supported one way or another. That's pretty much it. A lot of information thrown at you, so.
That is a lot. And Chantel said she only wanted good news, and you didn't give good news. In some cases. There was a mix. There's lots of good programs. There is a mix. There's some questions for you, Pierre. I'll just, in the interest of time, I'll ask them because I know we're short on time today. Do you have an estimate on the turnaround time from announcement to implementation based on previous government programs?
3 to 4 weeks. So the CEBA, if you're talking about the CEBA one, that should be fairly much quicker because they already have the implementation tools in place. The banks are already set up. The only thing is it needs to be, legislation has to be drafted. It has to receive royal assent. And then the banks have to then modify their application process, the loan agreements and all of the documentation that they need, which is why these take time, because it's not like that's been my biggest problem is that, the government makes a very vague announcement, and then I get a lot of calls from my clients going, hey, he just made this announcement, how does it work? And it's just kind of like, well, I heard the same thing you did. We don't have any information. So once they have all the details ironed out, they will make another releasing those details, and the devil's in the details as with anything else. And for anybody who's applied for the SUS, the 75% wage subsidy, there was a lot of devils in those details that a lot of people got wrong. And thankfully, the government has announced that mid-June, there will be a way to amend those filings so that if companies didn't get it right the first time around, that they will be able to modify it, repay back any of the money that they got, because the penalties for misfiling on that, the 225% penalty, nobody wants to get hit with those. So.
There's another question. Can you also clarify if another requirement was that the company had to have filed the 2019 taxes, meaning any new businesses formed in 2020 or not? Yeah,
so for the CEBA loan, you had to have filed your 2018, 2019 tax returns so that they can show that you were a properly, obviously, operating business. And then to show, because they need something to be able, so it was like the original, right? Tell us what was on box 14 of your basically your T4 summary from the prior year, right? So they needed something to basically to measure to make sure that you qualified. So like that, more than likely what's going to end up happening is because you need over $40,000 in expenses, they're going to say, okay, well, based on your last filing, which are going to be 2018 or 2019, depending on when you last filed, they can access that electronically and then match with what you've said. So you're saying that you have over $40,000 expenses. They're probably going to ask you for a certain line of your tax return, your corporate tax return, in order for them
to. So sorry, Pierre, the question is if you were formed in 2020, then you can't access it, right?
That is correct.
Filed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So then you have to fall under one of the other programs.
Okay. Okay, that came up. I don't see any other questions. Does anybody have one that they didn't put in the chat. I'm just going to do a quick scan. Okay, perfect. I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carol Shirtliff-Hinds to talk a little bit about the consumer's risk and mitigation of that risk.
Thanks for listening.
Carol.
Tracy. Thank you,
Thanks,
Tracy.
Pierre.
I'll try not to be depressing.
Mm.
It's hard for a lawyer, though. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, I
Yes?
believe so.
Okay, so I'm talking about the legal risks and liabilities of reopening during COVID. Okay, so as we all know, Ontario has unveiled the first stage of the province's recovery plan, right? So a large number of businesses are now given the green light to reopen as of Tuesday in the government's framework for reopening our province. So Ontario has now significantly expanded the list of businesses that can reopen. This is not unique to Ontario. This is happening across Canada. This is happening across the world. This is something that everyone is grappling with, is how we will do this safely. Now, examples of business being reopened are, of course, there's just a partial list. Is construction. All construction is to resume. In the vehicle dealerships, this is good for Jim. This can resume as well. In terms of retail, online was already allowed. Now you have curbside and delivery, provided that certain criteria met, like no indoor malls, so no Upper Canada Mall for a little while. There's street front entrances, and now we have to limit the number of people that are in the store. Like for a full list of the businesses that are open, I have a link here that I can post later in the chat, or I can just give to Tracy later on. It's pretty easy to find if anyone is looking for that. Now, there's now a new dilemma for the business owner. So now most business owners now are faced with an increasingly difficult task of keeping a business running, right? Protecting their employees, protecting their customers, while simultaneously fending off any potential legal liability. And legal liability, I'm afraid to say, is going to come. It's happening already in the United States, and the US is always ahead of us when it comes to lawsuits, but Canada's going to follow. Now, what is a legal liability? So here we talk about the duty of care. Like businesses owe a duty of care to their employees and must adhere to a certain standard of care. And failure of a business to meet that applicable standard of care will expose that business to liability. And one of the liabilities that a business will be open to will be negligence, for example. So businesses now must therefore take significant precautions to prevent a resurgence of the virus and create a safe working environment. And this is a heavy onus for a business, as we'll see later on in the slides. So what kind of precautions can we take? And we know some of the precautions already. Precautions include the physical distancing that we're all doing, the frequent sanitation of your workstations, common areas, etc. And employees stay home if ill. Like normally in the past, you'd have an employee who, notwithstanding the fact that he or she is coughing everywhere or really sick, saying, well, no, I'm still going to come to work. I'll still do my things. Like, no, the employer has to ensure an employee stays home. Now let's look at one of the claims that can be made. I'm talking about negligence. And negligence basically is a breach of a standard of care that's owed by a person who has a duty of care. This is what the law really looks at. So what is the standard of care? And this is, I guess, a lawyer's favorite line, because it's very fact specific, right? You basically have, the law looks to what a reasonably competent employer, and I'm using employer in this case because I think the majority of the members on the line are employers. So what would a reasonably competent employer do in similar circumstances to avoid creating a reasonably foreseeable harm? Now that's quite a mouthful. So what do we mean by that? What I'm saying here is very industry specific. So for example, the case that went to the Supreme Court of Canada, it's been quite a while, I think it was the 1950s, was a doctor who was operating on a patient and he left a sponge inside the patient. And of course, having a foreign object in the body had, the consequences of the patient becoming really ill. And he was sued. And this case went all up to the Supreme Court of Canada. The court found that looking at another doctor who was in the same position as he was not reasonably competent. So you have to compare yourself to someone else who's in the same industry as yourself, right? So for example, it is reasonably foreseeable a lack of sanitation and social distancing, given what we've learned right now, could lead to a COVID outbreak in the workplace. So you have to look at what are the customs and practices in other businesses in your industry. And if you're offside, then you're vulnerable. You're now exposing yourself to potential liability. Now, is your business taking steps in line with industry practice? This is what the courts are going to look at. So in some, I'm giving a simplification now of what the courts look for. And this is, I'm just looking at a 3-part test. And if I was talking to the Law Society, a group of lawyers, it'll be a lot more extensive, but I've simplified this so we know what the basic 3 steps are for negligence. First of all, you have to show that the employer owed a duty of care. And the employer does have a duty of care in these circumstances to create a safe work environment. The second thing the courts will look at is, has the employer breached that standard of care, right? And so the employer will be found to have breached that standard of care if his actions fall below the duty of care. And that's what I talked about earlier, where you compare what this employer is doing vis-a-vis other employers in similar industries. And then we look at causation, part 3. Did the employer suffer damages? Then yes, the damages would be, in this case, getting infected with COVID, and the employee would have to show that the fact that they got infected with COVID was based on the fact that the employer breached their duty of care. Now, there are a lot of pitfalls for the employer, because as we see, the standard of negligence is not set in stone. It's very fact specific. So what would be considered negligent today was not negligent last year, even 5 years ago, or even in January. Let's look at January, for example. In January, an employer who didn't enforce social distancing or didn't enforce increased sanitization, given what we knew in January, would be less likely to be found liable for negligence. Right? That's just in January. Fast forward 5 months to today. An employer who does exactly the same thing as that employer who did in January, he would more than likely be found negligent, given what we know now of not protecting the employee. And to take this example even further, let's say 5 months out from now, let's say we have new tests that show that social distancing and increased sanitization is not enough, the employer should be doing making additional steps, then that employer 5 months from now, who's doing what he's doing right now, will be found even liable for negligence. It is a shifting standard. It depends on what's happening at the time. And this is where the pitfall is coming for the employer, right? So what businesses are required to do to avoid liability changes daily. And so businesses now have the obligation to be diligent in order to stay up to date to avoid liability. And this is not an easy task. With businesses who are now reopening, who are looking at getting increased traffic, who are trying to deal with their employees, trying to manage everything. This is a nightmare right now, and especially with the shifting standards. Now, what can a business do? I'm going to say there's some possible steps to decrease liability. I'm being a lawyer, I would never say to eliminate liability, because that's never been possible. But what can you do to decrease your liability? And I have 3 examples here. This is not an exhaustive list. There are other things you can do. I just picked 3 things here that businesses can do. So business, of course, should stay up to date and make sure they comply with government recommendations and other public health recommendations. This way they can say that, look, I was duly diligent, right? I'm complying with what the government has put out there and what public health has out there. So you shouldn't find me liable. They also need to look at what is the norm for the industry that they're in. So you'd have to ensure that they're on side. So it doesn't matter if Costco is having all of their staff members wearing masks, and the mom and pop grocery store doesn't have masks in there, and then one of their employees are found to be COVID positive, and then a lawsuit ensues. Then they'd be hard pressed to show, perhaps in the industry, that they're not following what the norms are in the industry. So it's very important that we look around and we see what they are. Also, this is a good time to review your present office policies. You need to be redrafted to conform with recent public health guidance. And this is not static. This is going to be a dynamic document, because as we learn more about COVID, this is going to have to be drafted again and again to ensure that we fit within what industry standards are. And the employer then also has to ensure, trying to manage a business at the same time, so that all staff are in compliance with this new safeguards implemented. So this is no small task. Well, I'm not here trying to depress everyone, but I'm here just trying to give you an idea of what possible steps to decrease liability look like. It's not a walk in the park. And I appreciate that I have there are other speakers, and so that's what I have for now, other than if there are any questions. Thank you, everyone.
Carol, we've been asked if your presentation will be shared. I know it's in the recording. Can you share that separately with us so we can send it out?
Yeah, I can forward it to you, Tracy. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Oh, yeah, that's actually, it was 2 questions.
Okay. And now we're all quiet because I've now thoroughly depressed the group, and that was not my intention.
No, that's okay. I mean, it's a good point, because I remember on a previous call, somebody said, well, I see everybody's putting up the plexiglass and the guards
Yes.
at the stores, is that something we have to do to be compliant? So I guess the answer is it's not always written to be compliant.
No, it
Best
doesn't have to be
practices.
written. And if everybody
Yeah.
else in that industry is putting up plexiglass and plexiglass and you don't, then you're leaving yourself vulnerable right now, right? Because you'd be hard pressed to show that you keep up with the standards, what the industry standards are, conforming to those.
Yeah.
Tracy,
It's a good-
Jennifer Walker had a quick question there about liabilities if they remain remote.
Oh, that's interesting.
So sorry, what do you mean?
Jennifer, can you open your mic?
Yeah,
Hi.
I was just wondering, are there any liabilities or things we should consider if we decide that it's safer to remain remote and not accept employees back yet?
Well, I think that's a decision that all businesses are going to take, and you'd probably have less liabilities, but not all businesses can afford to be remote, right? There's some businesses who have to reopen. They look at Upper Canada Mall, that's sort of in abeyance right now.
I think I see where you're going with this, Jennifer, though. Like if you decide as a business that we're going to leave our employees remote and I don't know what, something happens to their computer or them at home, is that what you're saying, Jennifer? Or like they bring like a virus into your business through their own internet or something? Is that what you're referring to? Those types of liabilities?
Yeah, or any others that I wouldn't have thought of, that I think Carol often thinks of things that I think, oh, geez, I never thought of that.
Well, I think working remote, the only liability, though, not only, it's one of the liabilities that you're facing right now is safety on the internet and security and no one hacking your system. I mean, there's cases right now in the US where files are being held ransom for like $42 million. Like this is Trump's emails, for example. And so,
Right.
and it may be in your best interest to get increased insurance for that, because insurance companies now are offering security insurance, privacy protection insurance, in case your files are compromised. And it's a big thing for a law firm, of course, because those are private client files as well. So those are issues that take us to whether you can do things remotely and not put your client files at risk if that's the nature of your business. I don't know what the nature of your business is.
Yeah.
Perfect. I think I'm going to, in the spirit of time, turn it over to Trevor Beauchamp now. Trevor, I can't see you, but I know you're there because I met you earlier. Trevor, are you muted?
No, I'm off. Something froze up on me there. Can you hear me now?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Good. Good. Sorry about that. I'm just getting an internet connection is unstable. So hopefully it's fine now.
Oops.
Am I there?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me fine now?
We can hear you, but I suspect you can't hear us.
I can hear you guys.
Okay.
Okay. Can I go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay. I think my computer's doing funny things. Hopefully it hangs in there. I keep losing you guys, but I think what Carol's talking about is a perfect complement to what I'm talking about, where she's talking about the compliance side of things and legalities. And, you know, I'm going to talk a little bit about us and some of the resources that we've been working on in the province that will really help to complement that, but also document a lot of the stuff Carol was talking about. So a little bit about us first. I'm with Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. We are one of the 4 associations under the Ministry of Labor umbrella. We're partially funded by them. But whenever we say that, we also want to say, but we're not tied to the enforcement division at all. We don't work with the labor inspectors. So please don't be scared of us. We rarely talk to those guys. But I also want to mention on the call today, we have Lori McElwraith, who's our local consultant here. But I begged her to let me do this one because I live in Newmarket. I'm a proud Newmarket resident. And I said, I want to do this one because it's, you know, my chance to give back to some businesses that I really like having around Newmarket. A lot of businesses, I've seen a few names on here, businesses who have sponsored my kids' hockey teams. So I think that's great. And I get to give a little bit back here. But a little bit more about us. So recently our role with, we do a lot of, like we're basically the prevention side of things. We do a lot of health and safety training and program building and stuff. But with businesses closing their doors temporarily, we haven't been very busy. So a lot of our staff have been repurposed to the Ministry of Labor to work on the initiative. And what we've been working on really, really ties in well to this. One thing we've done is we've been working on a lot of outreach where the ministry, it's the data management branch that's been having us do this, having us reach out to businesses that are still open and talking to them about what kind of measures they're taking to protect their staff, to protect their customers, that sort of thing. And we're feeding that information up to the Premier's office because it becomes very critical information to help the Premier make decisions on when to reopen and who gets to reopen in that sequence. So Lori and I were talking yesterday, kind of joking about the fact that as health and safety professionals, we spend most of our careers being reminded that we always hold up businesses. And for once, we're in a position where we're going to help facilitate the reopening of businesses. So we're very proud to be a part of this. We get to bring a positive side to it for once. So we're looking at it from the perspective, I'm trying to guess at where everybody's mindset is. Everybody obviously wants to get back to business and they want to do it safely. I'd like to think everybody wants to protect their staff and everyone wants to protect their customers. And a lot of you are probably worried about compliance, and Carol just talked about a lot of that stuff, right? And one thing I've found is that in the last couple of months, there's been a culture that has developed where your customers are doing a huge favor to the compliance side, the Ministry of Labor inspectors, the bylaw officers. The customers are making their jobs a lot easier because customers are making decisions based on, I need to go shopping, which grocery store am I least likely to contract COVID at? So people are making decisions that affect your business. So the customers really matter in returning to work safely. So I want to get into your questions to say, okay, but really, what do I need to do in the meantime right now? So there's a list of resources, and there's going to be a document sent out with a whole bunch of links on their resources that the provincial government asked us to develop. And it's everything from, we have what we call our post-pandemic business playbook, which is a starter's guide to restarting your business. But we've got checklists for several different checklists, like some businesses who have been working remote, who are going back into their workplace, some who have shut down, who are starting up, some who have worked through it. The whole food supply chain has worked through all this and are trying to get back to somewhat of a new normal. And so there's a whole bunch of different checklists like that. And the reason this is important, it gives you some really good guidance. And I'm sure Carol would agree that it's also going to help you document this stuff. So if you are worried about compliance, if you do have a compliance officer that says, I see some measures you're taking, but what other measures are you taking? If you've got these checklists filled out to say, yeah, we've got this daily checklist we fill out, or we've got these articles we've shared with our staff, we've got a bunch of posters. And I say, take those things and be very visible about it. I think it's one thing to protect your staff and your customers, but be very visible about it to help ease those tensions, to say, yeah, this is a safe business to come and visit. You can rest assured that we are taking every measure we possibly can to protect our staff and to protect you as a customer. But at the same time, another thing we want to share with all the businesses out there is don't forget about the day-to-day safety stuff as well. And some of that stuff has become accelerated. And I'll give an example. I have a 17-year-old son who works for a grocery store here in Newmarket. And as a dad first and a health and safety professional second, I was extremely impressed with how quickly they had measures in place to protect their staff. And I love it. What I don't love is the stories he still comes home with the violence going on. And it's customer to customer, it's customer to staff. And people are under a lot of stress because of this. And we get that and we have to deal with that. But violence in the workplace is something that's been legislated in the province for about 11 years now. And there's been a lot of measures taken towards that. This pandemic has really heightened the potential for that. And a lot of you probably have stories already from your own staff, or where customers are impatient and they're lashing out at you. So it's something you really have to think about. The other piece too is mental health in the last 5 or 6 years has really taken a place in the health and safety world. And you're going to have staff that are anxious to get back to work. They want to get back to the routines. They want to get back to the paycheck, obviously. But at the same time, they might be in a position where the home daycare they normally used is not accepting kids. And it's something that as an employer, you have to realize that and understand that there are some hurdles like that you're going to have to work around. I think just one last point within those articles, and please, when we send those links out, have a look at them and check back often, because in addition to some of the tools and resources, we've also got a bunch of articles from, we have about 100 health and safety professionals across the province that cover a wide variety of disciplines that have been putting together helpful articles. And I'll just read a couple of them that I think are really going to matter to you. And think about these articles as keeping something printed, so you have something documented to show anybody who wants to know, how to decontaminate your workplace. There's a checklist that you can have that you can fill out and check it off to say, yeah, workplace has been decontaminated. Here's our checklist to demonstrate that to you. There's another article on 7 steps to managing hazards as stores reopen. And again, we're probably doing an article or 2 a week. So have a look at those articles and go back daily or weekly just to check. There's new stuff coming out. A lot of it is related. The stuff that's coming out is related very much to the Ontario's Back to Work plan, because we're finding that, I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, we were asked to work on a job aid and posters for golf courses. And last weekend, suddenly golf courses were open. So we're trying to stay one step ahead of this. And if you're part of a business that's opening soon, there's a good chance there's a job aid specific to that the Ministry of Labour has asked us to put together.
Great. Thanks, Trevor. I do have some questions coming up on the side, and I may have to ask the people to unmute their microphones if the question's not quite, I'm not reading it correctly. So Michael Sarsman writes, since provincial and federal governments want businesses to open and create employment and economic activity, how do different levels of government help manage some of the liability risk businesses face as they reopen to protect them against frivolous claims despite doing their best to comply, for example?
That's an interesting one. I know the WSIB has provided some relief to premiums. I shouldn't say relief, call it more of a deferral, I think, and where they're providing a little bit of that relief. But as far as day-to-day incidents go, where an employee is claiming they're injured, those would be handled on a claim-by-claim basis. So I know that's not the answer we're looking for. I don't think there's any relief in that area. What we are finding, though, is probably one of the #1 inquiries we have been around work refusals, because under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, every worker has the right to refuse. And a lot of people have been surprised by that. And it's not to say that you can't refuse because of your fear that you'll contract the virus, but there's still a legislated step-by-step process that you have to go through. And part of that process is if you can't resolve it in-house, you call the Ministry of Labour and the inspector will come out. And the inspector is there looking for objective evidence that you are at an increased risk. And Carol mentioned before about, comparable businesses, or I can't remember the exact term, but it's the same sort of thing to say that just because we're in the middle of a pandemic doesn't mean you get to refuse work. What it means is they're going to come in and look for objective evidence. So are you working next to somebody who has been exposed? Or are you working with somebody who, this might not apply now, but early on, are you working next to somebody who has just traveled back from a country that was a high risk? Those now you're starting to get into that objective evidence for a Ministry of Labour inspector to make a decision. But you can't just say, no, I'm not working because, we're in the middle of a pandemic and I'm refusing work. So you still need that objective evidence to be able to make those claims.
Okay. Mike Smith, you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. Thank you. A long-time listener, first-time caller. Trevor and Carol, I don't know who's going to answer this question, but so if you have a scenario where you have an employee who has disclosed that they've gone to some place and i.e. they've gone to a wedding or whatever. I know there are weddings actually happening, but they're exposing themselves to other people who you don't know what their scenario is. As an employer, do you have a right to document? Well, certainly you can document all you want, but is that something that you can put in their file as something from a I guess a historical reference as part of their performance?
So if Carol's okay, I'll start with this.
Okay.
And then Trevor, can you tell them to go home and force them to go home?
Yeah. So first of all, hey, Mike, how's it going? Speaking of people who have sponsored my kids' hockey teams and coached them. Yeah, I think when you look at it from the perspective of going back to what I was saying about work refusals, if there's a risk in your workplace as a result of somebody who has gone to a public event or has exposed themselves, going back to that objective evidence, does that
Yep.
put other people at risk? As an employer, you have an obligation to protect your staff. And it starts to get a little bit gray because the legislation never took this into account. But if you stick to that objective evidence, and let's say it gets to a point where the inspector is in there, the inspector's going to ask those questions, and that's going to come up to say, is there something within your control that can reduce the risk to the rest of your employees? And the answer is yes to that. And it's because one particular person has, there's a reason that they, you believe that they increase the risk in the workplace. Yes, you can send them home to reduce the.
And I agree. And I think you always go back to safe work environment. That's your duty. That's your obligation as an employer. And so it's not just that one employee. You're responsible for all the others employees as well, right? So if this employee goes and exposes themselves, then you're within your right to say you have to do the 14-day quarantine, right? No one could fault you for that. They can fault you, however, if you know that and you allow them to come back in and another employee gets infected, perhaps. That's when you make yourself vulnerable.
Yeah, thank you. So documentation is critical, obviously.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Richard Wessel asks, are the documents between WSPS and the other 3 labor organizations the same or very specific to their industries? For example, an office administrator in one industry does the same as another administrator in another industry. I don't think they're specific to job type, are they?
For the most part, no, but it does vary a little bit. So for example, there are some job aids that are specific to cashiers. And of course, to produce them for every cashier in every industry would, I don't think we would be able to cover everything. So they've been left generic enough for you to be able to take them and customize them to yourself. So, you have a job aid for a cashier as a position, so that could apply to a cashier in a grocery store, could be a cashier in a convenience store or a gas station or sitting behind the desk at a coffee shop kind of thing. Right? So for the most part, they're very generic and like a lot of these types of documents, there is an expectation that you take these generic documents and you customize them for yourself. And I think that's a great way to prove that, you just didn't download them and post them. You downloaded them. You can confirm that you took them and applied them specifically to your workplace.
Okay. Just trying to see on this side. If there's any other questions in the meantime, you can put your, just raise your hand, and then we, hopefully between me and the other staff, we'll see those hands raised.
There's a comment from Katie, I think, with Timeless Harmony Spa there, Tracy.
Katie, is your microphone off or on? Can you turn it on? Because I'm not sure if your question is for, oh, I still can't hear you.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'm here. I'm sorry, I got on really late. I was tied up in interviews, but yeah, I'm just asking questions again because I know a lot of people and I don't know my legal rights. One of my estheticians who is part-time is demanding full-time work if she wants to come back, because if she gives up the government assistance, she won't be making as much as she was before when she was part-time. Otherwise, she wants to stay on government assistance and not come back. I did send her a little bit of the legal documents from the government just saying if you do refuse work, then I may have to look elsewhere to get another esthetician. She then replied in writing that she feels unsafe to come back to work in the current situation. So I'm not sure how to go ahead, if I have to make sure I save her position, or can I just go ahead and say, like, I needed somebody?
So if you need someone and she's refusing to work, which this may amount to work refusal, if you're sure that you have taken all the steps you need to do in your industry to create a safe working environment, and you need someone to carry on the job, then you will have to look elsewhere and hire someone else. But you have to be fairly sure, and you may be able to prove this, that you're taking all the steps that are necessary. And her emails, without knowing all the facts, this is something all lawyers have to do, appear to suggest that she's trying to hold you hostage somewhat. And so you do have some good evidence and documented evidence on your side.
Okay, thank you.
And it's interesting on the point of what are the different levels of government doing to help reduce risk for employers. I know that we talked a little bit about it last week, but I still really like that idea of a training, some sort of certificate like WSIB, where you can say that as an employer, we have done everything because our employees have taken this course. We have the proof they've taken it. It's that comfort, I think, Trevor. And I know that it's not necessarily being talked about yet, but I think it's one of those things that would really feel much better as an employer.
Well, I never thought of this, but I'll forward with my list of links. I can add a link onto there because we do have a lot of e-courses that normally there's a fee for, and we remove the fee for any of the ones that tie into the pandemic. And we do have one that's available free of charge that's specific to pandemics. And ironically, it's not specific to this pandemic because a lot of people don't realize that, we went through this with SARS, we went through this with H1N1, and that's just a course that we kept around from back then. But this one here, because it's a lot more serious and it's worldwide, it's a true pandemic, it's a lot of attention's focused on it. But there are some free courses I'll include on there as well that people can take. And it's important to document that sort of stuff, because if you do have somebody who is refusing to work like that, and it gets to a point where the regulators have to be called in because you can't resolve it, that's one of the first questions the regulator is going to say, what have you done to protect your employees? And if you can provide documentation on that to say, you know what, I have this checklist, we sanitize every day and we have a checklist to make sure we got everything. And in addition to that, we have everybody go through this 1-hour e-course before they're back to work. So the more that you can provide back to that regulator, the more chances they're going to turn around and say, there's a term we use, the Occupational Health and Safety Act talks about due diligence, where the employer has to take every precaution reasonable in the circumstances to protect a worker. And that's what you're trying to prove, to say, I've done everything that I can within my power to protect my workers. And you could, I think you put a pretty good case together to say that I'm doing everything I can.
That course sounds very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we look forward to getting that link.
Trevor, somebody's messaged me to ask, from your perspective, will certain businesses be under more scrutiny than others? For example, in terms of checking up on them, restaurants, because there's food and there's kitchen and servers and menus. Will certain businesses be looked at differently than others?
So I don't know if they'll be looked at differently, but they're being prioritized right now. And I can't speak on behalf of the Ministry of Labor Enforcement Division, but I guess I can help speculate because we've been involved. They've been putting a lot of focus into proactive measures. I don't think they want to go out there and write orders and lay charges. They really want Ontario back to work, and the province is trying their best. We've spent the last month in what we call the food supply chain, developing aids for them. And a lot of Ministry of Labor inspectors have been going out, making sure they're covered. And the supply chain, it's everything from agriculture to the grocery store and everything between, your delivery industry, like your trucking, your warehousing industry. So there's been a huge focus on that area, mainly because those are the businesses that have had to remain open throughout this. The latest one, an initiative that is going to be launched next week, and I think the agreement's being signed today, is the OMAFRA, the Ministry of Agriculture, because I'm sure you guys have heard about the huge number of cases in the meat processing facilities. And we want to learn a lesson from what's happened in Alberta and try to prevent that in Ontario. And we don't know why there's such an increase in cases in the meat processing industry, but at the same time, that's the next big priority right now. And that's critical because that's our food supply chain. Right?
So, but what I also wanted to add to reassure everyone is that the courts are not looking for a standard of perfection, right? They're looking for good faith efforts that you've made, if you're being duly diligent. And it's also not a hindsight test. They're looking to see what you knew at the time. This is why I give you the example of January, May, and in the future. And just to I guess respond to one of Trevor's points as well, when it comes to employee communication is important. Usually for many businesses, the cleaners come at night and they're unseen, and then they go home and no one ever sees them. But if you sort of change that to visible cleaning, you can actually, the employees can actually see the staff cleaning, whether the doorknobs or the countertops or whatever it is. That goes a long way for the employer, and it also allays the fears of the employee. Just want to point that out.
Perfect.
Tracy, Deepak from the Sociable Pub had just asked, I don't know if it would be Trevor would have it or Carol, but if there's any specific links that you can provide for restaurants so that they can, you know, digest all of that information and see exactly what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, I can answer that. The links that I'll be forwarding on, and I'll double check just to make sure that I'm not lying to you, but restaurants, I believe, are part of those.
And this is a part for various industries. This is a time for various industries to come together. Like if it's like a restaurant association, for example, they can say, okay, these are the standards that we expect. That would go a long way in reducing liability. That way a business can be sure that they're on side with respect to their counterparts in the same industry.
Great. I think we'll probably wrap up. We have a few minutes left. Are there any other questions, or MP Van Bynen, did you have anything that you wanted to add or any updates?
Thank you very much, Tracy. This has been very informative for me. And again, I can't compliment the Chamber enough for all of the hard work and the professional expertise that they bring to their members. So this has been a really good learning experience for me as well. So thank you for inviting me to join you.
Our pleasure. Always nice to have you there. Dawn, did you have any updates from Minister Elliott's office?
Sorry.
That's okay.
Well, I think most people are aware of the latest updates over the past couple of days. I think one of the great things was the announcement yesterday about the 20 million for the research funding, and there's been specific universities and health centers who have received some of that funding, and that's everything towards vaccinations to looking for immunities. So I think that was a good news announcement yesterday. There's going to be another one shortly, so I'm anticipating that one with Minister McNaughton. He'll be speaking today, so that should be a good one. And other than that, the face covering. So everybody knows now that it is highly recommended to wear your face covering when you are out in public, and especially when you cannot physical distance. So I think what everyone's speaking about today falls in line exactly where the government, the provincial government, is making their recommendations as to the importance right now, especially as things are opening up, to manage the sanitization, covering your face, and the best practices of doing that. It was interesting. It was late last night. I saw, I think it was CTV News at the end of the news session. They showed, the doctor showed exactly how to manage your mask. So talking about a video so your employees watch exactly how to put on a mask, how to take off a mask. I think those are going to be important things as well. So thank you, Tracy, and everybody, Carol, Trevor, everybody. Great job today. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I think I'll wish everybody a happy weekend, and thank again our speakers for being with us today and sharing such important information. And I think it's supposed to be a beautiful day tomorrow, so get out there and, you know, keep the distance, but get some sunshine.
And Tracy, as usual, Tyler will send out an email to everybody on, and we'll have all of the links that everybody has referenced and websites with all of that information.
Perfect.
Thanks,
Great.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.